So I loved that daily word. You know, that whole piece of smile. And somebody else had been telling me that that's one of the things they miss the most about COVID is not being able to see each other's smiles. And I realized that what I have been, one of the funny, odd, unexpected gifts from COVID is that it's given me more time to look into people's eyes. So I think we're learning to see the different smiles. And my original thought when I read that was, well, I don't have time to run it by the board, but maybe we could just all take a breath, drop our masks, smile at each other for like 5 seconds, and then put the mask back on. So that was one thought. But the reality is, you know, we each need to do what's comfortable for us, and looking at the smile in each other's eyes, I think gives me a chance to see more of who's there, what's going on for them. Because I think most of us at different stages of our lives learn to smile at different levels. So there's that, hi, how you doing? And there's that one that comes from your heart that just says, I am so glad to see each one of you. And that's definitely what comes for me when I'm here at the chapel. And I think that's a lot of what Rose-Mary gave when you walked in the door. When we're in the chapel, there's a particular place that Rose-Mary used to always sit. And there was a particular cushion that she loved. And I like sometimes to just go by that seat, put her cushion back in that space. She's been gone 10 years. And I still feel her presence here. And I have no doubt, I mean, when I watch the people coming in with dogs today, I was going, oh, Rose-Mary's going to love this. Because she always looked for an opportunity to have a blessing with pets. I think there was a good bit of St. Francis that lived in her. So one of the pieces that I wanted to share with you today was a bit about the woodland altar that I made here. There's always something magical blooming here at the Estatoa, the chapel grounds, and most of the time we miss it. So I think that's part of what I love about the Opelski group, is that it gives me one day, welcome. It gives me one day at least out of the month that I get to slow down and really visit with the ground much more intimately than I might normally, in terms of getting to see what this land is saying to us, what it's offering us. And like all of life, and like Rose-Mary, there's always a lot more gifts in the moment than we often receive. So I guess that's part of what Sundays are about for me, is slowing down. Crow's been great about teaching me that, is to let Sunday be a day that I don't go and do so much, that I just allow myself to slow down, look, feel, count my blessings, and connect a bit more with that gift of life that Ruth was singing us to. So part of what I wanted to just let you know is that we have some absolutely spectacular, two of my very favorite wildflowers are blooming over here by the bathroom. So even if you don't need to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. They're not en masse. I mean, you know, we still need to keep distancing, but there are two flowers over there that you only see at different spots of the Blue Ridge Parkway. One of them is called Toad Lily. That's the one with the speckles on it. There's a little one up here if you don't want to trek over there. And there's also a beautiful pink one that stands about 2 feet high that's called a pink turtle head. And again, these are pieces that you'd have to know where to look, but they are part of the fabric of this part of the country that we get to call home. So I invite you to stop and visit with those, and then you'll probably see some other things that you might see in your own yard. But those were the ones that said that they wanted to come and be a presence here today. I'm amazed again and again and again at how this chapel came to be, and the divine elements of synchronicity and the following of one woman's heart, one woman's dream, and how her whole life kind of led her to this place. I wish more of you had had a chance to meet Rose-Mary. And I will tell you that over there on that little red table, there are some CDs. Not all of you have heard it or seen it, but it's called Divine Wayfarer. And it's a piece that Ron put together with the help of a lot of amazing musicians, some of which are here today. And the Ubuntu choir has 3 or 4 pieces on there. And there were several songs that were written specifically for that album by people who knew and loved her. One was from Listen to me, her husband's name. I've got 4 names there, and they hang on up. Lisa Rankin, who's a phenomenal singer also. And this chapel has been blessed from the beginning with amazing people who wanted to bring their music. One of the pieces that Rose-Mary dreamed of for a long time was having classical music here at the chapel. And it wasn't until Maida came and offered her many years of deep love for the classical music that we had it. And I'm so glad that Rose-Mary got to hear and enjoy them. So some of Maida's music is in there too. So please, if you haven't had the opportunity to take one of those, please do. It's our gift to you. We've got plenty, and we usually only offer them once a year when new people show up. So feel free to just see if it sings to your heart the way it does to mine. The other piece that I want to make sure you do is notice when you take the CD out of the cover, what's behind it. It's pretty cool. So, what I wanted to do, Crow and I came over yesterday evening and went through the, kind of got lost over in Rose-Mary's chapel. There's a couple of little books over there. Actually, Rose-Mary loved to take photos. And they did Thursday adventure outings. I think it was usually Thursday. Val would know. She was there for almost all of them. But there would be... Rose-Mary would always begin it with a prayer, and then they would take off for some adventure. And she always had her camera, and there was a lot of great photos over there. And a lot of what I was looking for were the faces of the people who've gone before us, the first Wayfarers. And the piece that came to me when I was wanting to speak for this day was that we are the Wayfarers, the founders, if you will, maybe not the originals, but the founders and the holders of the Wayfarers' energy for those who are yet to come. And we will never get to meet some of those people. If we're lucky, we might, but whether we do or not, the love and the intention that we hold both in caring for this place and caring for each other is priceless. Priceless. I hear that from people who aren't here now, can't be here now, that even though they haven't been here in 20 years, it still feeds them. That's saying something to me. That's something worthwhile. That's something of substance. So may we each have dreams that bring that kind of substance and that kind of nourishment to the people that we meet, whether it's through your smile or otherwise. So what I wanted to do when we were going through all those pictures was capture as many of the names as I could. And I was humbled very, very, very quickly. Even having Crow with me, I was not there at the beginning. I was not one of the original founders, but I got here as quick as I could, as they say. It was early 90s when I got here, but Crow was there, and Teresa was there, and quite a few other folks that I did capture. So what I did in talking with Crow around some of that and finding out how many more people are responsible for this that we have, the physicality of this that we are blessed with. I wanted to acknowledge them. So I wrote down about 150 names. I'm going to pass some of these out later. And ask that you just hold them, ask that you take some home and hold them this week in some place that you just give them a thank you. Meister Eckhart, I believe, was the one who said that if the only prayer you ever offer is thank you, it will be enough. And I love that. The power, the depth, the challenge, the richness of that. Just thank you. Because we are all here at the grace of those who've gone before us. So I want to just offer a real quick, what was that? I had the phrases just right. Oh, yeah. That was it. If you close your eyes for just a moment. From the depths of my heart, I offer gratitude to all those who have contributed to the integrity, the beauty, the vitality of this structure and of the spiritual nature of this place, that it might bless all who come here. Thank you. My style of talk is different than a lot of folks. I don't have that skill to be able to study and compile something in a way that has its own flow, so I will just give you the best narrative that I can for this chapel. And I'd like to leave a little time at the very end for anybody who knew Rose-Mary and people who knew Ron, which is, goodness, he was just here till, 6 years ago? I still miss him. And I have a blessing from each of them to put at the end. But I'm going to ask any of you who would like to speak briefly at the end to just collect a thought or two about what it is that particularly nourishes you about this chapel, or any memory, any brief remembrance that you would like to share about Rose-Mary or Ron, just to kind of fill in the blanks for those of us who didn't get to know them as well. So my thought was, what is it that draws us to a particular chapel or church? And I think some of us are seeking the same familiar songs and places of knowing that we grew up with, and others of us are seeking a spiritual family that accepts who we've become since then, and how we can really continue that expansion of our spiritual self, that deepening. Rose-Mary was a seeker and a devoted teacher of the path of Christianity through the teachings of Jesus and unity, and that space of how unity focused on learning how to apply those lessons, so they weren't something interesting in a book, but that they were something that we could grow and live with. How do we love one another? How do we truly find those places where we can honor the wisdom of the children as just as much as the adults? Where do we weave that all together into our day-to-day relationships? It seems to me that that's the challenge of our life, is how do we apply what we know, what we've come to really accept as the high path. She taught Sunday school at Unity of Miami in the 60s, and one of the early members was actually a student of hers in Sunday school. We found her up here many years later. She went on to become a certified Unity teacher before moving to Sky Valley in 1980. Her hunger for a more inclusive spiritual family inspired her to make a space in this community for a New Thought church, and that's how she and Ron incorporated this church originally, was as a New Thought ministry. I guess it started, well, not started, but once she got here, that hunger kind of drove her to keep her eyes and ears open, and she saw a little building, a little cabin on the side of the road in Dillard, and felt that would be the right spot for her ministry. So her husband Duke supported her in it, bought it for her, and she had to find a place to move it. Louise Dillard had been a friend of hers when she was a girl, and it was through that friendship and all the weeks of looking for the right spot and following Rose-Mary's dream about the right spot would be on a beautiful site near a stream, So when Louise offered to lease her this land, Rose-Mary knew it was the right spot. So it would be another 5.5 years actually between the time that she bought it, had it moved here, and was renovating it slowly, steadily, efficiently, before she would be able to have a service there. And it was September 12th, I believe. Yep, 34 years ago, with a small wood stove for heat, no plumbing, electricity, but there was an outhouse. That takes dedication. So if you catch Teresa or Crow, they can share more stories with you about those early days. Crow, I mean, you still having a hard time hearing me? Okay. Anybody else? Okay, sorry. Try to not wander. It's hard to do that though, because the mic is here, and all of you are over here and over there, and you're why I'm here, not the mic. But I guess I have to remember the mic is what connects us for now. So, the chapel over there is what, we figured it was what, 18 by 24, the original tiny house, right? So as they get it done, and Rosemary's spirit begins to draw the people who want to have that deeper conversation, it begins to fill up. Families with young children arrive. So that upstairs area became a Sunday school. Now, for those of us who are easily distracted, you can imagine what it would be like to have a fabulous service going on here and 9 children upstairs. So that was some good motivation to let it grow, to build something more, to build a separate place for the kids. They looked at having a school bus. Bill and Doris Isley had a school bus that they had outfitted for classrooms, and they were looking at bringing the school bus over here so they'd have another place for the kids to be in. And at that time, that little, and the group began to struggle with, do we want to grow? Do we want to stay small? There's a real value in being able to know everybody that's there. It's family-oriented kind of church. And Crow was working, had been a home designer for many years, and had been working on timber frames for a number of years. Had a good bit of experience with it. And was working at Lofty Brands with John Koenig. And John was really, if not the only, the premier timber frame builder in the Southeast in the early 90s. And people were coming from all over America to study timber frame building so they could go home and build their own. Well, studying it is one thing. Cutting the logs is one thing. Putting them up is another. So Tony, Crow, John, dozens of people that had come to take the classes came to build our chapel. So this was done in 2 sections, and the first half of it ended about here. And then the second half was a year or so later. And in the meantime, all the way, this couple dozen members of the chapel were working like crazy to raise the funds for the materials. The labor was free, but you still had to buy all their materials to do the wiring, the painting, everything that had to be done inside and out. So there's some interesting pictures. You get to see the chapel and its bones, both the timber frame and the outside before the siding went on, and all these different pieces that came together in stages. So that felt to me like a bit of real divine intervention. You need to grow, and something this amazing becomes available for you. That's just exquisite to me. I can hardly imagine what it would have been like. I wish I'd been there for that. Watching it go up, the pictures of it just amaze me, to see how many people it takes to raise. I can't remember all the language of it, but all the beams and bents that go into making something this high. And it's done by hand, with poles and ropes. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So while all of that's going on, putting it together, there are people sitting in, these wooden benches and little hard wooden chairs for services every Sunday. So it's an evolving piece that all of these wayfarers, all these early wayfarers were doing. And with that, there's Rose-Mary, and there's Ron right by her side. She had met him at CSA, the Center for Spiritual Awareness down in Lakemont, a few years before this began, and approached him early on, I think probably within the first month or so from what I could tell from the notes. And he was just the right partner, to help her realize that place of how to take a dream to reality, how to take it to the service that she was wanting. It's so easy to take for granted the sacred space that holds so much peace and solace for us until life throws us a curve, and then we're really, really grateful. Now more than ever, our communities and our world need places of peace to connect us to our deeper wisdom, a place to look more closely at how our thoughts and actions contribute to the chaos or the peace in our world, and how we can contribute our own unique gifts to a vibrant, healthy experience for all life. This Wayfarers Chapel is that place of peace for me. The love flows deep and steady, like the Estatoa stream that you hear. Rose-Mary once dreamed of this land. And the buildings that are a vessel for love. And we are their stewards now. We have a responsibility to continue to tend them with care, as the wayfarers before us have done. And I invite you to consider serving, either as a board member if that calls your heart, sharing your gift of music, whatever that is, or maybe joining the Opelski team on the grounds once a month to help us tend the land and keep it from becoming all roses and kudzu. But to look to see what it is that you have to contribute. We are, and have always been, divinely guided, wonderfully supported. Really 17 Sundays of dry, or relative dry. That's just amazing in such a wet season. And like those who began this great gift of love, give from the very depths of our hearts, so that all who come here will be nourished as we have been. I'd like to open it now for a few minutes for anybody who was either here. I know Teresa had a little bit that she wanted to share, but anybody who knew Rose-Mary or Ron and wanted to speak to something specific that you have learned from them. While they're doing that, I would like to put my mask back on and step around and give you each some names to take home and just hold, either on an altar, bathroom mirror, or over on a windowsill, seashell, whatever, but something that will allow you to just focus, just for this week, on those who've gone before us, those who made this possible for us. And at the end of that week, you might go dig a hole in the ground and plant them. Whatever you'd like to do. But it just feels important to me that we connect with those who've gone before us. Teresa, and anybody else who's collecting their thoughts, feel free.
Well, I'm not sure my thoughts are collected. I didn't know I would be able to be here this morning, so that I quickly jotted down a few notes, and I'll try to stay within that framework. And I want to give a quote, one of Rose-Mary's quotes that I really intended to end this with. The quote is out of context with how I wanted to end it. Rose-Mary's, I guess, message that always stays with me is Christ never meant for us to be spiritual wimps. Christ never meant for us to be spiritual wimps. And the context I have it in now is different than what I want to end it with. While we were doing the meditation, I felt Rose-Mary's presence so strongly. And I get very, very nervous speaking, standing up and speaking, and several of you know it. I'm not comfortable with that at all, and after all these years I should be, as much as I've been exposed to it, but I'm still not comfortable and usually choose not to. But when I was sitting there and I was listening to one of my favorite people, Ruth, and the meditation, this voice came to me that said, Christ never meant for us to be spiritual wimps. And I thought, what is this all about? And it was, I needed to get up and say how thankful I am and give my gratitude, because my first statement I was going to make was, thanks to all for sustaining this beautiful spiritual place. So with that being said, it helped give me a little bit of courage to stand up and speak, because it is a spiritual task to stand up and give thanks for what we have, and give thanks to those who have sustained this. I moved here, my family and I moved here in the spring of 1986. I had studied unity back in the early 70s, along with many, many other spiritual practices. I was raised Catholic, but as a very tiny girl, I guess I walked to a little bit of a different drummer and always studied and saw, and was a seeker. Like Rose-Mary, I was a seeker. And Rose-Mary and I were immediately connected. And I drove by and I saw this little bitty sign that said Unity. Well, I'd also driven out Lake Raven. I would wander. I was a wanderer. And I saw CSA. And I thought, So there I became connected with CSA. I also became connected with a lot of very fundamental local religions in Clayton, in Raven County, and the people there. But most of all with Rose-Mary at this little Unity Chapel. And the sign was smaller than the one that's out there now. So to see it was amazing. So I saw it and stopped. And it was this little chapel here, and I had two little boys along with Crow's little children that would get up in the loft, and it was wonderful to have children. And I miss that I miss children and that family unity. That although it was small, it was there. I also planted flowers where you first come in at Rose-Mary's Chapel. And Rose-Mary used to stand at the door, and sometimes she was a very, very beautiful woman. Her eyes held sometimes a tremendous amount of sadness, along with her joy, a tremendous amount of wisdom and a depth of her soul. When I first drove down here, the chapel wasn't open, no one was here, but it was this presence of this land that moved me, and the connection. And I shared some visions that I had across that field with the native people, Indian maiden, and some of the other some of the other stories, but this was a true vision, a true connection of this land that I still feel to this day. My boys and their daddy did the framing. I think I gave the picture to the boys, and they were small, and they were helping push the timber frames up, and so they're all part of it. And this summer I was able to bring one of my grandsons to the property and share it with him, and I was hoping to be able to do that today, and they're outside of DC. I took a picture down by the water last spring when my grandson was here, and I sent it to my son. He didn't know where we were, and he said, "Oh, is that down by the chapel?" So he knew. He'll be 40 in a couple of weeks, but he remembered that space, which I thought was amazing. He's traveled, been all over the world, but that evidently held that very special connection with him. So when I talk about gratitude, I had been gone and just up back and forth part-time for a number of years. 2 years ago I got back here full-time, and the word sustain, we're here to sustain, and I thought that's exactly true. I do recognize a few people, but many people I don't, and since my memory's bad, even those who were here and come back, I don't recognize them. So, nor do they recognize me, who had long dark hair, and much smaller. But I think the word sustaining and love and the talent, the talent that is here is just so amazing. And I think this area breeds that creativity, that spiritual connectedness that I needed to get up and acknowledge and not be a spiritual wimp about, and recognize that Rose-Mary would absolutely, or does, not would, does absolutely, feel the love, feel the beauty. And I looked over there, with so many of the songs and so many of the things that Joyce said fit right into this little bitty thing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that I wrote down. And there was a little hummingbird fluttering across the table there. You had "I'll Fly Away" anyway, and other songs. I mean, to tell you, I saw it and I was like, "Oh, look!" Of course, I could have done it. Ruth would have let me, but I saw that. And again, that is, don't be a spiritual wimp. Express what there is, and the gratitude that people have given in the years that I was gone. I would come back and I would just drive down here. Sometimes I'd see people out there and I thought, "Oh, I'm not going to get out." And I didn't. I would just come back when no one was here. Like I've done many times in the past, and just sit. So I'd like to say a little bit about Rose-Mary. She was small, but she was very mighty. And she was very, very strong. You could see it. And I have such an admiration for strong women. And she was a very, very strong woman. And I met Ron at the same time, and they complemented each other. But there were so many other people here that I became very close with, and some excellent musicians. And lots of love, and lots of really, I felt like spiritual wisdom that you could look up information, see, yes, a book here, book there, based on knowledge, but a lot of it wasn't based on something you could look up in a book. It just, for those it resonated with, it was there. It was all inclusive. inclusive. You know, it didn't matter who you were, what gender you were, what religion you were, your political view. It was just all inclusive. And that was part of Rosemary's love. The other area that Rosemary was so excellent with, more so than anybody I have ever met, and I've tried to be there, but I don't do it. I get all into the problem. She could give affirmations. She could do the positive affirmations more so than anybody I had ever met in my life. I knew about the positive affirmations as far as learning how to build it up from some of Unity's teachings. But she also did it in her natural form of wisdom. But, you know, I, like many others, we get all into the problem. Next thing you know, everybody's upset or something, and you feel better, but the real positive affirmation might not have been laid out there for you. And she could do that in such a graceful but a very strong way. And she would quite often do that with me, because I would go to her. Here I was. I didn't know anyone, and things weren't going as was planned. And so she would sit with me, and sometimes we would not even talk about the issue, which is amazing. But we would talk about an affirmation. And she was so good. And I had a business in town, and she would just stop and come in and say, I just wanted to hug my beautiful friend and give her a kiss, and walk out the door. She would go. That was Rosemary. And because I was wrapped up in a lot of my own stuff, I really wasn't aware of a lot. I was aware of the few issues, but Rosemary had a full plate like many of us do. She had a full plate, but I guess, I don't know, she was older than I was. You know, I was in my mid-30s. I don't know, I just thought she knew all the answers, and for me, she did. But she also had a very full plate, but she was able to still give of herself and share what needed to be shared. And so I had a way of being able to be a fireball when it came to helping somebody else. And I'm still that way. I could be a real hellion when it comes to helping someone else. But for myself, oh dear God, I become sometimes just totally immobilized and maybe a wimp. A couple people have seen me be a total wimp when I've not been able to cope. And so standing up for myself has been a very much of a challenge. And we sat on that front porch, on the steps, and I was talking to her, and she looked me straight in the face, and she said, Teresa, Christ never meant for us to be spiritual wimps. So I guess with that statement, that was going to be my closing statement, is that, you know, you find your strength to stand up for yourself as much as you do for someone else. But it also became my opening, totally a different context, with also saying Christ never meant for us to be spiritual wimps. Stand up and show your gratitude, your love, your joy, your thankfulness for all of the talent that's here. Because I know if Rosemary was here, she'd be doing the same thing. So anyway, so I guess that is my memory of Rosemary, and I need to remember it more often. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
I feel like we've probably given everybody enough goosebumps and enough of a feel like we've probably given everybody enough goosebumps and enough sense of rosemary. Anybody else feel strongly moved to speak right now, or shall I close it for us?
Let me say one thing,
Yes, Garnet.
if you don't mind. I never met Rose-Mary, but I did know Ron. But the interesting thing about when I first came here and became part of it, there was a spirit, and that spirit moves. And there were two great events to me that actually moved me, and one was when we decided that we needed to shore up the chapel. And it was just as clear as day that Rose-Mary said, yes, you need to get that chapel back in shape. I worked too darn hard to get it where it was. And we didn't have the money. But I remember standing up in here and saying, don't worry about it, we'll have the money. It's gonna get done. And it got done, and it's shored up, and it's in great shape. And the second one was when we decided to build the labyrinth. Working out there with Bob and Marita and Boyd and Mary, the people came. Mary came out of the blue, and Mary knew how to really set that up. But we would be out there just working in clearing the land and doing the work, and Rose-Mary was there. She was overseeing. I swear, like I said, that there are things that have moved me in my life, but those two events were so clear to me that this is her home. And I, for one, will do everything in my power to live up to her expectations. Thank you.
Get the picture? Well, she left you a poem that I found just this week again. She did a whole book of poetry that's out there somewhere. We may find it and republish it at some point. But Rose-Mary left us a poem, and Ron left us a little blessing from a couple years ago. I found it on my phone. It said, Ron's was, "We are truly blessed all of the time. And it is such a delight when we can raise our heads from the drama to notice it." I just think that's delicious. We are all God's children, and He wants us to be happy. That's the last parts that He added. And from Rose-Mary, her poem was, "Let peace so fill my heart and soul that peace is felt in every place I go. Let gentle kindness reign. Let sharing be an avenue of grace. Let peace infill the race and earth become a loving space where God is known and all are one. Let this be so." Namaste. Go forth and shine, Wayfarers.